The doctor smiled while my husband nodded. I remember thinking his smile looked practiced, like a waiter repeating the same polite grin at every table. My name is Laura. I'm 54, and I've been married to Greg for nearly 30 years. That morning, I believed I was heading into a routine checkup. Something about a small nerve issue. I trusted them both, the man in the white coat and the one who vowed to protect me. I didn't know that trust was the thing being tested, not my legs. The day began gently. Sunlight slipped through the curtains and scattered across the kitchen table. The smell of toast drifted from the old silver toaster, and Greg hummed something soft from the radio. He buttered my bread without asking, then placed his hand over mine. "You'll be home before lunch," he said. I smiled because I wanted to believe him. The air was warm, the coffee too strong, and I felt the kind of peace that always comes before something breaks. At the hospital, the hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and overbrewed coffee. Nurses moved in calm rhythm, whispering like they knew too much. The doctor leaned over me with that same rehearsed smile. "We'll just fix a small nerve pinch," he said, as if we'd discussed it before. Greg stood beside him, nodding like a man approving a purchase. I remember thinking it was strange that no one handed me a pen. When I woke, time had gone missing. The light through the blinds had changed, sharper, colder. A clock on the wall read 3:30, but it felt like midnight inside me. My legs didn't move. I tried once, then again, but nothing answered. Panic came slow, like a rising tide I couldn't stand against. Greg's voice cut through the blur. "It went well," he said, his tone too steady. "You just need rest." The nurse smiled, but her eyes looked sorry. Later that night, when the corridor quieted and the machines hummed their soft warnings, I saw a form clipped to the foot of my bed. My name sat there in black ink, curved and clean. The handwriting wasn't mine. A signature, forged and final. The document said I had given consent for a corrective spinal procedure. It felt like reading my own obituary. The truth didn't arrive as a scream. It arrived as stillness. I understood that someone had decided my body without me. The next morning, Greg brought flowers, white lilies, the kind people send when words won't do. He kissed my forehead and said, "You're safe now." I stared at the petals and wondered how safety could feel so much like confinement. He kept his wedding ring gleaming, and I caught its reflection on the hospital tray beside the metal bracelet on my wrist. 2 circles. One I chose, one they forced. I couldn't tell which trapped me more. By evening, the doctor returned. "Recovery will take time," he said, flipping through a chart without looking up. "Your husband has been very supportive." The words slid over me, like oil. Supportive. The same man who signed papers while I slept. I wanted to ask what he gained, what they promised him, but my throat felt sewn shut. He touched my shoulder lightly, as if ownership required reassurance. Then he smiled again, the same hollow expression that started all of this. I kept staring at that forged signature. It wasn't just ink. It was a verdict. Somewhere between those letters, my life had been rewritten. I realized that my body was no longer mine, and the people who should have protected me had traded my voice for convenience. I couldn't walk, but I could still remember every detail: the color of the walls, the hum of the fluorescent light, the faint metallic taste of betrayal. That memory became the only movement I had left. As night folded over the ward, I promised myself that silence would not be my end. I might not stand again, but I would rise in another way. I didn't know how yet, only that the truth had to start somewhere. Maybe it began with admitting the simplest fact: I never signed that form. He signed my silence before I could speak. He bought flowers for a funeral that hadn't happened yet. Yellow lilies this time, too bright for a sick room, too cheerful for a house that had forgotten laughter. He said they were for me, to freshen up the place, and placed them in a vase on the table where sunlight never reached. I watched his hands tremble slightly as he arranged the stems. My legs still refused me, but my eyes were working fine. I noticed the faint scent of medicine clinging to his shirt. The house used to smell like butter and soap. Now it smelled like pills dissolving in water. The warmth of our mornings, coffee, toast, the radio humming softly, had thinned into silence. Greg moved around the kitchen with practiced gentleness, the kind that hides something sharp beneath it. "You need to eat," he said, setting down a tray with oatmeal. I nodded, but my stomach turned. Even the spoon felt foreign in my hand. I wasn't sure what part of my life was mine anymore. My friend Claire stopped by in the afternoon, carrying groceries and the kind of sympathy that doesn't need words. She smiled when she saw the flowers. "They look nice," she said. Then her voice dropped. "How are you holding up?" I wanted to tell her everything, but fear makes you polite. I just said, "One day at a time." She helped me into clean clothes and went to the kitchen to put away the groceries. That's when she found them. "Laura," she called softly. I heard paper rustling, the sound of something secret being touched. She walked back with a handful of crumpled pharmacy receipts. "Were you taking all these?" she asked. I shook my head. My name was printed on each one: sedatives, muscle relaxants, and another with a name too long to pronounce. She frowned. "These are expensive, and half of them shouldn't be mixed." Her words hung between us like a bad smell. When Greg came home, I kept my face calm. "Claire stopped by," I said. "She found some receipts." He didn't flinch, just smiled that careful smile. "I bought those for you," he said. "The doctor prescribed them." His tone was smooth, but too quick, like someone closing a door before the wind could get in. "You should trust me, Laura." I nodded slowly, pretending the lie was a kindness. Later that night I asked, "Do we have enough saved for all this treatment?" He rubbed his temple. "Don't worry about money," he said. "Insurance covers it." But I knew he hated insurance. He'd said so 100 times. Something about paperwork and taxes. Now it was suddenly convenient. That's when I felt the first sting of dread crawl up my spine. I didn't ask again. Instead, I memorized the prices printed on those slips. Each dollar amount felt like another small betrayal. Around 9 that evening, I watched him empty my old purse into the drawer. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just organizing," he replied, not meeting my eyes. I noticed the missing checkbook and the envelope that used to hold cash for groceries. He closed the drawer too fast, like someone slamming shut a confession. I turned my gaze to the vase, half the flowers already wilting. A faint chemical scent drifted up from the water, too strong to be from petals. When he came to my side, his hand brushed my hair. "You're healing well," he said. "The doctor's proud." His voice was syrup over poison. I smiled because fear teaches you to. But inside, something cold clicked into place. I wasn't being cared for. I was being contained. "Greg," I asked quietly, "why did you pay the hospital with my card?" He blinked, a beat too long. "You're imagining things." His words carried a practiced gentleness, the kind that keeps you from asking again. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. "I just want the truth." He leaned close enough that I could smell the faint hint of antiseptic on his breath. "You need rest," he said. "Stop making yourself sick." When he left the room, I stared at the flowers again. The stems drooped, and the water had turned cloudy. A small piece of receipt floated near the edge of the vase, like it had been torn and tossed there. I reached for it, hand shaking, and pulled it free. The print was smudged, but I could read enough. Another purchase, another date, another drug. That night, I hid the receipts under my pillow. I wasn't sure what to do yet, only that proof had a weight, and I could feel it pressing against me. For the first time, I stopped taking the pills he offered. My head cleared slowly, like fog lifting from a field. I realized he didn't want me better. He wanted me quiet. He bought flowers for a funeral that hadn't happened yet, and now I understood whose it would be. He was curing me of suspicion, not pain. They toasted my recovery, like it was a secret deal. Greg raised his glass high, smiling as if he'd saved me himself. The doctor lifted his wine and said, "To courage and trust." His voice slid through the room like oil. I forced a smile. I'd learned that pretending was safer than asking questions. The table shimmered under soft light, but every reflection looked false, like faces painted on glass. The warmth of the evening was planned. Our dining room smelled of roasted chicken and red wine, sounds of cutlery against porcelain blending with polite laughter. My neighbor, Mrs. Porter, had joined us. She lived across the street, always with her phone in hand, capturing every little moment as if life might vanish without proof. Greg said she should come so the house felt lively again. I think he wanted witnesses, to our happiness, not my pain. The doctor spoke with confidence, too much of it. "It's remarkable how quickly she's healing," he said. "This kind of progress takes willpower and faith." I caught the flicker in Greg's eyes, a shared understanding that I wasn't meant to notice. My hands rested uselessly in my lap, but inside everything was trembling. When Mrs. Porter offered to pour more wine, she leaned close and whispered, "You look pale, dear. Want me to help you lie down?" I shook my head. "I want to see what they're celebrating." She nodded quietly, setting her phone near the centerpiece, camera still rolling. I didn't think much of it then. The conversation drifted toward money, as it always seemed to lately. Greg laughed, mentioning long-term security and smart policies. The doctor agreed, saying, "Proper planning makes all the difference." I felt my stomach tighten. The words didn't sound like comfort. They sounded like transactions. Every toast, every joke between them felt like a contract written in front of me, only I wasn't allowed to read the fine print. "Would you say it was a difficult case?" Greg asked. The doctor chuckled. "No case is easy when emotion's involved. But in the end, results speak louder than doubt." "Results?" I said, my voice too soft. He looked at me, still smiling. "You survived. That's what matters." "And walking?" I asked. A pause. "Recovery takes time." The table went silent for a second. Then Greg laughed, loud and forced. "She always wants everything done yesterday." The others laughed too, but the sound didn't reach their eyes. I looked down at my plate. The mashed potatoes blurred. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the steady ticking of the kitchen clock, each second louder than the last. Later that night, Mrs. Porter texted me. "You should see this." I opened the clip, and the sound filled the room. My husband's voice, low and casual. "So it's final then?" he said. The doctor's reply. "She'll never walk again. But the paperwork's clean. You'll both be fine." Then laughter. My husband's. Theirs together. It wasn't the sound of joy. It was relief. Relief at something paid off, something done. My fingers shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I played it again, slower this time, just to be sure. Every word cut deeper. The doctor's voice carried the same tone he used in the hospital. Professional, steady, detached. Like my paralysis was a result, not a tragedy. The next morning, I confronted Greg. "You knew," I said. He was tying his tie, calm as if preparing for another ordinary day. "Knew what?" "What the doctor said. You knew what he did." He met my eyes in the mirror, still smiling. "You're tired. Stop looking for someone to blame." I slammed my hand against the armrest of my chair. "He said I'd never walk again, Greg. He said it like he was proud." He turned, voice rising for the first time. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think this helps me?" "Yes," I whispered. "I think it helps you a lot." He left without another word, door slamming hard enough to shake the wall. I sat there in the echo, phone clutched in my lap. Their laughter replayed again in my mind until it didn't sound like sound anymore. It sounded like truth breaking open. I forwarded the clip to myself, then to Claire, the only person I still trusted. "Keep this safe," I wrote. She replied in seconds. "Whatever you're planning, don't do it alone." But I already knew. Some fights start the moment you stand still. That night, I deleted nothing. I wanted every frame, every word preserved. Because now I understood what recovery meant to them. It was profit, not healing. My broken body was a line item on their success story. I didn't cry. I just sat by the cold dinner table, staring at the untouched flowers from the night before. Their petals had started to brown at the edges, curling inward like secrets collapsing. Somewhere beyond the walls, Mrs. Porter's phone buzzed again. Their laughter became evidence. My name was worth more broken. That's what I realized the day I opened the wrong envelope. It was marked private, thick and crisp like something important. I shouldn't have touched it. But when a woman loses the right to her own body, she stops asking permission. Inside was a policy with my name on it, cleanly typed, professionally sealed, and signed in a hand that wasn't mine. I read the first line twice before my eyes caught the number at the bottom. Triple compensation for permanent impairment. I felt the air leave the room. The house was quiet that morning. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked just past 9, its sound sharp against the hush. Greg was at work, or so he said. I sat in my chair, holding the paper like it might bite me. The page smelled faintly of ink and something metallic, maybe from the envelope's glue. There it was in plain English, his signature, a blank witness line, and a payout clause that turned my body into a paycheck. When he came home that evening, I asked about it. "An old policy," he said, "just in case." He poured himself a drink, no hesitation in his tone. "You're overthinking again." I stared at the glass in his hand, the faint swirl of ice reflecting the lamp's glow. "How much is just in case worth?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just smiled that small, patronizing smile that used to comfort me and now only burned. The next day, I called the number on the letterhead. A clerk picked up, polite but detached. "I just want to confirm who filed this," I said, my voice calm, though my heart pounded. There was a pause, then paper shuffling on the other end. "It shows the attending physician verified the claim," she said. "Dr. Miller himself." The line went quiet, then she added, "And your husband renewed it last month." That sentence hit harder than any surgery could. I thanked her, hung up, and sat staring at the phone. The doctor who crippled me, and the man who vowed to protect me, partners on paper. My pain had an exact market value now. It wasn't tragedy. It was profit. I looked around the room, the bills stacked on the counter, the unpaid invoices, the car payment reminder tucked beneath a newspaper. Every dollar missing from our account suddenly had a reason. They were cashing in on my suffering. For days, I pretended nothing had changed. I kept my tone steady, my smile practiced. At night, I waited until Greg slept before I rolled to the desk and opened the drawers. Every drawer had its own story. Old receipts, appointment cards, printouts from the clinic. In one corner, a small folder marked renewals. Inside, copies of emails and letters, including a typed note from the doctor. Confirming successful procedure, permanent outcome. My chest tightened. Permanent, not recovery, outcome. I started collecting everything, scanning each document with my left hand, saving files under harmless names. My fingers shook, but I managed. Each new page felt like a brick laid in a wall between who I'd been and who I was becoming. I wasn't sure what to do yet, but I knew one thing. Evidence mattered more than outrage. One night, around 10, Greg walked in and saw me with the papers spread across my lap. "What's all this?" he asked. "Just sorting mail," I said, folding the folder closed. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't strain yourself." His hand brushed my shoulder, a warning disguised as concern. "You need rest." I forced a smile. "I'm fine," I said. Inside, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I let rest mean silence. Later, alone in the dark, I opened the envelope again. I ran my fingers over my forged name, tracing the curve of the letters. It was strange, seeing your life turned into numbers and ink. The policy called it coverage, but all I saw was cost. The stakes had never been clearer. I was worth more to them broken than alive and walking. That realization didn't break me. It built something steadier. Cold, clear resolve. By midnight, I had everything scanned and hidden. I stared at the folder name glowing faintly on the screen. Something ordinary, something Greg would never click. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. I didn't know how long it would take or what it would destroy, but one thing was certain. They'd turned my recovery into their salary. The nurse's whisper sounded like mercy. It came late at night, around 11, when most of the ward had gone quiet. I was half awake, tracing the glow of the hallway light against the wall, when I felt something slip under my blanket. A folded paper. The nurse's voice trembled as she leaned close. "You didn't need that surgery," she said. Then she straightened and walked away before I could answer. I waited until her footsteps faded. My hands shook as I opened the paper. It was a printout. Rows of numbers, medication names, and dates. At first it looked ordinary. Then I saw the duplicates. 2 days listed twice, doses that didn't match what I remembered. Some entries were for injections I never received. My pulse quickened. Someone had rewritten my recovery line by line. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal, the kind that never leaves a hospital even after cleaning. I could hear the hum of the vending machine outside, the rhythm of machines breathing for people who couldn't. I stared at that paper until the black ink started to blur. It was proof, simple and solid, that the story they told me was a lie. When the nurse returned to check vitals, I whispered, "Why are you helping me?" She hesitated, glancing at the door. "Because I've seen too many like you," she said. "You're not the first." My voice broke. "You could lose your job." Her eyes softened. "Some things are worse than losing work." Then she left again, her badge flashing under the dim light as she disappeared down the corridor. I folded the log and hid it under my pillow. That single sheet of paper felt heavier than the wheelchair beneath me. It wasn't just data. It was my truth, stolen and returned by someone brave enough to care. I thought of Greg and the doctor, their practiced smiles, the way they spoke about me as if I were an account to be managed. That paper meant I wasn't crazy. It meant my pain was deliberate. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Greg visited around 9, carrying breakfast and that false warmth he'd mastered. "How are we feeling today?" he asked. "Better?" I said. My tone was steady. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, and I noticed a small stain on his sleeve. Ink, the same color as the report. "You've been writing again," I said softly. He chuckled. "Paperwork never ends." Then he placed a small envelope on the tray. "For you. Hospital billing. Just routine." After he left, I opened it. More numbers. More documents with my forged signature. Every dollar spent, every payment routed through his account. The total at the bottom made my stomach drop. More than $20,000 billed for procedures I never had. It was all linked, every lie building toward a single profit. That night, the nurse came again. "Keep copies," she whispered. "Hide them somewhere safe." I nodded, tears burning behind my eyes. "Why are you risking this?" I asked. "Because you still think you can't fight," she said. "You can." Her words stayed with me long after she was gone. I started to move differently after that night. Not my legs, but my will. I learned how to prop my phone on the bedside table, how to record conversations, how to scan papers with one hand when Greg wasn't home. Each act felt small, but together they built a rhythm, a plan forming quietly under the noise of hospital machines and polite conversations. A week later, when the nurse slipped one last paper into my blanket, an internal memo confirming altered post-op documentation, I almost didn't breathe. "This is your proof," she whispered. Then she left for good. I never saw her again. That paper became my first weapon. I didn't shout or cry. I folded it neatly, placed it with the others, and felt something stir inside me. Not hope yet, but movement, the kind that begins deep before it reaches the surface. The paper in my lap weighed more than my legs. They called it hysteria before reading the report. The words stung worse than pain, sharper than the needle that had started this whole nightmare. I sat across the desk from the officer, his tie crooked, his smile too patient. The air in the office was stale, full of paper and coffee gone cold. I held the folder close to my chest. "It's all here," I said. "The altered files, the nurse's statement, the fake insurance renewals." He nodded, eyes already glazing over. "These things happen," he said. "You should focus on getting better." He reached for the form and tapped his pen twice, then glanced at the wall clock. The ticking filled the silence between us. It was just past 3 in the afternoon. I watched the second hand move while he stamped my complaint. "We'll look into it," he added, like it was a promise he'd already forgotten. The sound of that stamp hit harder than his words. It meant the truth now lived inside a drawer I'd never be allowed to open. I left the office feeling lighter and heavier all at once. Outside, the sun glared off car hoods, too bright to look at for long. The parking meter blinked red. I was out of time again. I fed in another coin, my hands shaking. I'd spent more on taxis and copies that week than on groceries. Each dollar meant less food, less rest, but it felt like buying small pieces of control. Proof costs money, I thought. Justice always sends you the bill first. Days turned into weeks. No one called. My messages went unanswered. Every morning I checked my email, the inbox as empty as the promise of that stamp. Greg started asking questions. "Why are you wasting your strength?" he'd say. "You think anyone will believe you?" His tone stayed soft, but the warning underneath grew louder. One evening he brought flowers again, white ones this time, funereal and fake. "Let's stop living in the past," he said. I wanted to throw them out, but they were plastic. They wouldn't even die right. A neighbor stopped me in the hall one afternoon. "I heard you filed something," she whispered. "Greg said you're confused. It happens after trauma." I forced a smile and wheeled past her, my heart pounding. It wasn't confusion. It was clarity. Too much of it. I started keeping a notebook by my bed, writing everything down. The dates, the calls, the way people looked away when I spoke. Every unanswered ring, every "we're processing your case," every faint excuse went into those pages. If they wouldn't give me a voice, I'd build one on paper. One morning, around 10, I went back to the office. The same clerk sat behind the desk, pretending not to recognize me. "Still no update?" I asked. He looked at his computer, lips pressed tight. "It's under review," he said. "You can check again next month." I leaned forward. "You said that last month." He sighed, tapping the same clock with his pen. "Ma'am, please don't make this harder for yourself." That was the moment I understood. Their silence wasn't neglect. It was strategy. That evening, a friend of Greg's dropped by. He worked in the same firm as the insurance company's lawyer. "You're making a mess you can't clean up," he said. His voice was polite, rehearsed. "Let it go before you lose more." I asked what he meant by lose. He looked toward the front door. "Sometimes," he said, "people stop helping when you push too hard." Then he smiled and left a basket of fruit on the counter. Every piece tasted like warning. By the end of the month, I'd spent more than $300 printing documents, buying folders, mailing registered letters that came back unopened. The receipt slips piled up beside the lamp, a paper mountain of effort no one wanted to see. I caught myself staring at them one night, the lamplight flickering across the edges. Each one was a moment they'd tried to erase, and I refused to let them. When Greg noticed the pile, he frowned. "You're making people uncomfortable," he said. "You think that helps your case?" I looked him straight in the eye. "If they won't listen," I said quietly, "I'll make them see." He smirked, like I'd told a joke. But even he must have felt it, the shift. I wasn't the patient anymore. I was the record keeper. Every lie they wrote about me now lived beside its correction in my drawer. That night, I opened the folder and stared at the complaint receipt again. The ink had faded slightly where my thumb had pressed too long, but the stamp still read the same. Received. Proof of being ignored was still proof. I placed it back under the lamp and whispered to myself, "You'll read it one day." Because no system, no man, no clock that keeps ticking forever can hide what's already written. If they wouldn't listen, I'd make them see. The mailman's mistake became my proof. I remember hearing the clatter at noon, the sound of envelopes sliding through the slot, the same as every other day. But one caught my eye, a plain white envelope, torn slightly at the edge, with the doctor's clinic name printed in bold at the top. It shouldn't have been mine. Still, something in me said, "Open it." My fingers hesitated for a moment, then ripped the rest of the seal clean. Inside was a single sheet, stapled at the corner. The paper felt heavy, professional, the kind that carries secrets. I read the first line and stopped breathing. Regarding payment coordination with spouse, confirm policy transfer upon claim approval. My husband's name sat right below the doctor's, 2 signatures looped neatly under words that decided my life. It wasn't just fraud, it was partnership. I sat there, staring at the letter until the print blurred. The faint ink smell mixed with the bitter scent of coffee cooling on the table. For months, I had searched for something real, something that couldn't be dismissed as confusion or trauma. Now it was in my hands, delivered by accident, like the universe had finally stopped looking away. That night, I called a friend of mine, a paralegal who'd helped me draft the initial complaint. "Can you verify something for me?" I asked. She met me at a cafe near the courthouse the next morning. The city was loud around us, but my world had gone quiet. I slid the letter across the table. She read it once, twice, then whispered, "This is bad for them. Very bad." Her thumb traced the signatures. "You could build a case with this." I felt a chill even though it was warm out. "Then why does it scare me?" I asked. She looked up. "Because it means they'll fight harder now." She wasn't wrong. Proof doesn't bring peace. It brings pressure. When I got home, Greg was already there. He was sorting through bills on the counter, his back to me. "Mail came early," he said without turning around. "Anything interesting?" I froze, the letter hidden inside my bag. "Just junk," I replied. He smiled slightly. "You should let me handle that stuff. Less stress for you." I could hear the lie behind the kindness. "I can manage," I said quietly. He shrugged, dropped the bills into a drawer, and walked away humming a tune I'd grown to hate. Later, I hid the letter behind the framed photo on our hallway shelf, the one from our 20th anniversary, back when I thought we were still a team. The glass felt cold as I pressed it against the wall, the paper tucked flat behind it. The frame clicked into place, sealing both proof and memory in the same space. Every sound in the house felt sharper that evening. The stapler on the desk clicked once when Greg filed paperwork in his study. That sound stuck with me, a sound of closure, of sealing what should stay open. I kept hearing it in my head as I replayed the memo's words. Payment coordination. The phrase was clean, distant, and cruel. It turned my pain into procedure. At 10 that night, I couldn't sleep. I wheeled myself into the living room and stared at the photo frame. The shadows stretched long across the carpet. My hand reached for the edge, and I pulled the frame down again, just to feel the paper behind it. Proof felt solid, its corners sharp, its texture rough from the stapled edge. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't gasping for air anymore. They could deny my memory, but not my mail. The next day, I called my friend again. "Keep a copy," she said. "Lock the original away." So I did. I made 3 copies and hid them in 3 different places. One under the kitchen drawer liner, one taped beneath a book cover, and one folded into an envelope addressed to myself at my sister's old apartment. It was a strange kind of safety, knowing my truth now existed in multiple forms. I couldn't walk, but I could outlast them. A week later, Greg mentioned the doctor at dinner. "He's been under stress," he said casually. "People like him don't need more trouble." I set my fork down. "You mean people who profit off it?" He looked up, surprised. "You sound paranoid," he said. "You're seeing patterns that aren't there." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes mistakes end up in the wrong mailbox." His face froze. He didn't ask what I meant. After he left for the night shift, I took the frame down one last time and looked at our smiling faces, trapped under glass. Then I pulled the photo out, replaced it with the letter, and set it back upright. If anyone ever came looking, they'd see us still together, just not for the reasons they imagined. They'd signed my sentence together. Someone turned my chair toward the window while I slept. I woke to cold air brushing against my arm and the soft hum of traffic outside. The window latch was open, even though I'd locked it before bed. For a few seconds, I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming, until I saw the faint trail of mud near the wheels of my chair. Someone had been there. The room still carried that faint burnt smell, like smoke that never cleared. I glanced toward the hallway. Everything looked untouched, too normal to trust. I reached for my phone, but the battery had died overnight. It was just past 2 a.m, and I could hear a low mechanical click from outside, then silence. By morning, I had convinced myself I imagined it. That is, until I noticed my chair again. It was turned slightly toward the window. I never sleep facing that way. When Greg came in with coffee, he smiled too easily. "Rough night?" he asked. I nodded. The latch was open. He laughed. "You probably forgot to close it. You've been restless lately." His voice was calm, almost tender, but it left a mark sharper than anger. At 10, I called the police. The officer arrived within an hour, writing things down faster than he listened. "No sign of forced entry," he said, checking the frame. "Maybe a draft popped it open." I told him I'd heard someone move the chair. He looked at me, polite but detached. "Happens sometimes after trauma," he said. "Memory tricks you." I stared at his badge while he spoke, the shine catching light the same way Greg's watch had the night before. When he left, I noticed the smell again. Smoke. Faint, but real. I searched the corner near the curtain and found a thin streak of ash along the windowsill. Greg didn't smoke. The doctor didn't either. But his brother did, and he'd helped Greg move my things when I came home from the hospital. Suddenly, the smell wasn't random. It was personal. That evening, Greg came home early. "You called the police?" he asked. I nodded. "Someone was here." His tone sharpened. "Do you think I'd let that happen?" I didn't answer. He took a step closer. "You're not well, Laura. You need rest, not reports." I said quietly, "Then why did your watch catch the moonlight outside?" His eyes froze. "What?" I swallowed. "The officer said no one came in. Maybe you didn't have to." He turned away, muttering something about delusion. I wheeled closer, my voice steady. "If it was a dream, why do you smell like smoke?" He didn't reply. Instead, he picked up the broken flashlight from the shelf, the one that had stopped working last month, and turned it in his hands. "You're tired," he said. "You imagine too much." I watched him press the switch, the click echoing through the room. It worked now. The next morning, a police report arrived in the mail, routine follow-up. It listed my statement, then the officer's conclusion, "No evidence of intrusion." At the bottom, in small print, it read, "Caller appears anxious." I stared at those words until they blurred. The world had a way of labeling women like me, worried, fragile, mistaken. But I wasn't mistaken. I'd seen what I'd seen. That night, I set up a recording device on the windowsill. I waited until Greg fell asleep and hit record. I didn't need proof for them anymore. I needed it for myself. Around 3, a faint sound played through the recorder, metal scraping against glass, then the quiet thud of the chair being nudged. When the sun came up, I felt calm. Fear had a pattern now. I printed the police report and marked the line that said "No entry." Then I wrote beneath it in red ink, "Check the recording." I placed it beside my bed, a reminder that I wasn't losing my mind. Someone was trying to make me believe I was. If I was dreaming, why did he smell of smoke? She believed me before reading a single page. Her name was Sarah, a legal advocate known for never taking a case unless she smelled injustice first. She walked into my living room with a coffee mug and a sharp pen, not a smile. "Tell me everything," she said. For the first time in months, someone wasn't asking if I was stable. They were asking what was true. I handed her the stack of papers I'd guarded like oxygen. Complaint copies, payment records, the misdelivered letter. The steam from her coffee drifted between us, the air thick with quiet intent. She flipped through each page fast but careful, her eyes scanning, her brow tightening. "They left fingerprints all over this," she said finally. "They thought you wouldn't see it because you were supposed to be too broken to look." Her words steadied me. Every doubt I'd carried began to shrink. She took out her pen, the kind with a faint scratch when it wrote, and began drafting an affidavit right on my kitchen table. "You're filing for institutional negligence," she said, "and conspiracy, if we can prove coordination." I asked, "Can we?" She looked up. "Oh, they made it easy for us. They didn't expect you to fight." By the afternoon, we'd turned my living room into an impromptu war room. The clock on the wall struck 1 as we sorted evidence into piles: emails, billing ledgers, procedural notes. For every record I'd saved, she found a connection I hadn't seen. "This email references a transfer 2 days before your surgery," she said, tapping the page, "and this receipt shows your husband deposited the exact amount the doctor billed, same day." My chest tightened. "So he knew." She nodded. "He didn't just know. He arranged it." I leaned back, gripping the armrest of my chair. The world felt smaller but clearer. Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee and said, "This time, they picked the wrong patient." Something in her tone sounded like promise, not pity. She drafted until the ink nearly ran dry, the affidavit growing line by line like a lifeline. "Once we file this," she said, "they'll try to settle. They'll want silence." I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm done being quiet." She smiled faintly. "Good. Then we'll speak loud enough for the walls to shake." As the afternoon sun faded, the smell of her coffee lingered while she read my statement aloud, marking phrases with her pen. "This line," she said, "keep it. It's your truth without apology." She placed her signature at the bottom, then turned the paper toward me. My hand trembled as I signed. It wasn't fear. It was release. Proof no longer lived in a drawer or behind a frame. It was now official, sealed, and ready for daylight. When she left, she paused at the door. "I know how they work," she said softly. "They'll pretend they still hold the power, but after this—" She tapped the file under her arm. "We make the rules." I watched her walk down the path toward her car, her pen clipped neatly against the folder like a weapon polished for war. The sky above looked gray, but the air felt cleaner somehow. I exhaled and whispered to myself, "Let's see how they walk now." She said, "Let's see how they walk now." Their chairs faced the truth they built. The boardroom smelled faintly of paper and antiseptic, as if even the air wanted to stay clean. I sat at the long wooden table, the same height as theirs now, not looking up, just listening. The gavel struck once. "Case number 72, the arbiter said. My file slid across the surface toward the panel of white coats who had once decided my body's future. The doctor cleared his throat first. His voice cracked. "There was no intent to harm," he said, reading from notes that sounded rehearsed. My husband sat beside him, avoiding my eyes. The microphone between us picked up every shallow breath, every rustle of paper. Sarah, my advocate, stood behind me, steady, quiet. "Intent doesn't erase outcome," she said when it was her turn. Her records were altered, the surgery was unnecessary, the payments were traced. One of the board members adjusted her glasses. "You're claiming conspiracy?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "We're proving it." She handed them a copy of the affidavit. The pen marks, my signature, the nurse's testimony, all there. As they flipped pages, I could hear the faint echo of the paper. It sounded like footsteps in a long hallway, moving toward something that couldn't be undone. Then came the nurse. She spoke softly but clear. "I saw the falsified entries myself. I changed none of them. When I asked why, I was told not to interfere." The room fell still. Even the clock on the far wall seemed to hesitate between ticks. For the first time since my operation, I saw their faces lose shape. The doctor stopped pretending to write. My husband's hand fidgeted with his tie, the same one he wore to every hospital fundraiser he'd dragged me to. Sarah looked at me and whispered, "You're doing fine." I wasn't speaking, but she knew silence could hold power too. When the arbiter asked if I wanted to add anything, I said, "They turned my pain into paperwork." The words weren't loud, but they stayed in the air longer than I expected. Across the table, one of the board members shifted. "Mrs. He stopped himself. He didn't need my name anymore. My case number carried enough weight. He nodded toward the clerk. "Enter the testimony. Schedule the review." The gavel hit again, short and final. But I knew this wasn't closure yet. It was. The sound of walls starting to crack. As people stood, the doctor leaned toward my husband and muttered, "This could still be contained." My husband's reply came out through clenched teeth, "Then fix it." Neither realized their microphones were still live. The words spilled into the record, into history, into my favor. When the session ended, Sarah placed the transcript in my lap. "Keep this safe," she said. "It's more than evidence now. It's accountability." I looked down at the stack of paper, heavy enough to balance months of disbelief. Behind us, the nurse reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "You weren't crazy," she said softly. "You were right." As we left, I could hear the faint scraping of chairs being pulled back into alignment, as if they wanted to pretend none of it had happened. But the sound of the gavel still lingered. It wasn't just a noise, it was an ending disguised as order. The silence sounded like a sentence. They called it "The Patient Who Fought Back." The headline stretched across the front page like a verdict. My face, tired, lined, and seated in the same wheelchair that once symbolized defeat, was printed under it. The article began with my story, not their defense. For once, the world wasn't asking if I was imagining things. It was asking how no one stopped them sooner. The journalist, Anna, had interviewed me 3 times before publishing. "You'll lose privacy," she warned, "but you'll gain proof that can't be buried again." I told her, "Let them see. I'm done hiding." When the newspaper arrived that morning, the smell of fresh ink filled the kitchen. The sound of folded paper tearing open felt like release. Every word she wrote carried weight. Names, dates, and the board's transcript quoted line for line. It was no longer my word against theirs. It was public record. By noon, cameras lined my front gate. I could see flashes through the curtains, the kind that blink before questions you can't always answer. Sarah, my advocate, called and said, "They'll spin this, but stay steady. The truth's louder than they are now." She was right. Every station repeated the same phrase. The patient who exposed malpractice and collusion between her surgeon and spouse. The words sounded foreign, and mine all at once. Greg came home late that evening, claiming he'd stayed out to avoid reporters. He dropped his keys harder than usual. "You've humiliated us," he said. I looked at him and replied, "No, I just stopped lying for you." His voice rose. "You think you'll win?" I didn't flinch. It's not about winning, it's about being believed. For days, the doorbell rang nonstop. Some left letters, others donations. A retired nurse sent $50 with a note. "For your courage, not your bills." Still bills came anyway. Legal retainers, hospital fees, repairs. I paid what I could, not because I wanted to, but because control over my own money felt like a second kind of freedom. Sarah said a class action fund might form soon. I told her I wasn't waiting for permission to rebuild. On the 3rd morning, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years knocked gently. "I saw you on the news," she said, her eyes wet. "You made all of us look braver." She handed me a copy of the newspaper she'd framed. "Keep it," I said, but she refused. "No," she smiled. "You already earned it." When she left, I stared at the headline again. The photo captured more than survival. It showed defiance. At dinner that night, I watched the broadcast replay on TV. The anchor's voice was calm. "Authorities confirm the doctor's license is suspended pending investigation." The footage cut to the boardroom where he once sat, then to Greg, caught leaving his office, refusing comment. The microphone flashed under his chin, but he said nothing. The silence was louder than any denial. When I turned off the television, the room stayed quiet. For the first time in months, that quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt earned. I leaned back and said to myself, "They can't rewrite it now." I wasn't just a patient anymore. I was a name that meant something they couldn't erase. Outside, I heard another camera click. Someone shouted from across the street, "You're an inspiration!" I smiled faintly. I'm just done being afraid. My reflection in the dark TV screen looked older, stronger. I'd learned that justice isn't a courtroom. It's the moment the world sees what you lived through and calls it wrong. He finally saw my face on TV. He offered peace with a signature. My lawyer slid the envelope across the polished table like it contained a choice instead of a trap. The mediator sat between us, calm, rehearsed, holding a pen that gleamed under the overhead light. "It's generous," she said softly. "A clean ending for everyone." I didn't reach for it. I just stared at the paper, the same way I'd stared at the first consent form that ruined my life. The check was large enough to erase every unpaid bill and repair the roof that still leaked when it rained. But money has weight, and this kind carried guilt. My lawyer whispered, "It's a settlement, not an admission." I nodded. "Exactly. It's their silence, not my justice." The pen rolled toward me, stopping near my hand. I could still feel the texture of the last one, the forged signature they used to claim I'd agreed to surgery I never wanted. My name had been their weapon once. Not again. I turned to the mediator. "How much for dignity?" She hesitated. "That's not something we can quantify." I smiled faintly. "That's the problem." The clock on the wall showed 11:30. Outside, the hum of traffic mixed with the faint tap of rain against the window. I thought of how many mornings I'd spent balancing bills, counting coins, waiting for him to decide what I deserved. This wasn't peace. It was hush money printed on corporate letterhead. My lawyer sighed. "If you refuse, you'll wait years for trial." I said, "I've already waited years to be believed." She lowered her voice. "You could rebuild with this." I shook my head. "I'd rebuild on truth, not pity." I pushed the papers back toward her. "Tell them I don't sell confessions." The mediator shifted, uncomfortable. "You understand, once you sign, everything stops." I looked up. "No, once I sign, everything ends." I thought of Greg's voice when he'd told me we couldn't afford another appeal, how he'd said, "Just take what they give you." He never meant peace. He meant control. He'd taught me that comfort bought on lies was just another kind of cage. The check sat there, blank space for my silence, ready to be filled with numbers that couldn't measure what was taken. Sarah's words came back to me. "They'll call it closure to make you feel guilty for wanting justice." She was right again. Closure is just the word people use when they're tired of hearing the truth. I leaned back, letting my fingers brush the paper's edge. Smooth, cold, perfect, like every lie they'd signed before. "Do you want me to destroy the draft?" my lawyer asked. I said, "No. Keep it as evidence." She frowned. "Evidence of what?" I met her eyes. "Of how far they'll go to look generous while hiding what they did." The mediator gathered the papers slowly. "You're refusing the offer?" I nodded once. "I'm refusing the price." She looked down, murmured something about protocol, and began packing her folder. I watched her slip the pen inside, the same pen they'd wanted me to use. When she stood to leave, she said, "You know this means another year of hearings." I smiled. "Time's never been the enemy. Lies have." When the room emptied, I sat alone at the long table. The smell of ink lingered, sharp and faintly metallic. I placed my own pen beside me, the one Sarah gave me after the affidavit. Its barrel was scratched, its ink nearly gone, but it had only ever written truth. I took a deep breath, pulled one clean sheet toward me, and wrote a single line in the center. "My story isn't for sale." Then I signed my name. I signed my name only to truth. The truth looked brighter under oath. The courtroom lights cut through the heavy air as I sat behind my attorney, hands steady for once. The judge entered, robe crisp, eyes unreadable. "All rise." I stood, the Bible still warm in my palm from the oath I'd sworn moments earlier. It felt heavier than it looked. The clerk read the case title aloud, and for the first time, I didn't flinch when I heard my name beside theirs. The doctor sat at the defense table, pale and restless. My husband avoided my gaze. I could see the faint tremor in his fingers as he rubbed the edge of his tie. Across the aisle, Sarah organized the files with quiet precision. She whispered, "This is where truth finally speaks louder than position." I nodded, unable to answer. The judge began. "We have reviewed the testimonies, documents, and prior findings." His tone was even, but every word felt like a hammer on glass. "The evidence establishes a coordinated breach of duty, falsified consent, and financial exploitation." He paused. "The defendants are found liable for fraud, malpractice, and conspiracy." The word fraud hung in the room like smoke. My husband lowered his head, the same way he had whenever I begged him to admit what he'd done. The doctor exhaled, defeated. For a moment, the silence felt sacred. I didn't smile, not even when the gavel struck once. Victory didn't sound like celebration. It sounded like an ending. Sarah leaned closer. "The license is revoked," she whispered. "Full damages awarded." I looked at the paper the clerk handed her. My name printed beside a number that was supposed to mean restoration. I couldn't tell if it felt like justice or an invoice for suffering. "You won," Sarah said softly. I shook my head. "No, the truth won. I just carried it here." As the judge continued reading, I caught sight of the Bible resting on the witness stand, pages slightly bent where hands had pressed too hard. It wasn't a symbol of faith to me anymore. It was a record of promises, kept and broken. The light reflected off its cover, steady and white. It reminded me of the mornings when I'd watched hospital ceilings blur above me, when I thought the truth would never rise again. When the session ended, people began to file out slowly. Reporters whispered in the back row, pens ready, cameras waiting. I stayed seated. Sarah gathered her notes and said, "You don't have to attend the next session for sentencing." I looked up. "I know, but I will." My voice surprised me. It didn't shake this time. She smiled. "You sound taller." I laughed quietly. "Maybe I finally am." My husband stood near the exit, eyes darting between the floor and the door. I'd once thought his silence meant guilt. Now I knew it was fear, the kind that grows when control dies. The doctor didn't look at anyone. The bailiff motioned for them to leave. As they walked past, their shadows crossed my feet, and I realized how small they both seemed. Not because of what the judge said, but because the truth had stripped away everything that made them powerful. The clerk handed me a copy of the verdict. The paper was warm, freshly printed, still smelling faintly of toner. I folded it once and slipped it into my bag. Justice had weight too, but this time I was strong enough to carry it. He looked smaller than his lies. I dreamed of walking. Then I woke standing in truth. Morning light poured through the same thin curtains that once shadowed my pain. It wasn't harsh anymore. It was calm, steady, and warm, the kind that didn't ask for permission to stay. I reached for the letters stacked on my table, most of them from people I'd never met. "You gave us courage," one read. "You reminded us silence isn't safety." I traced the words with my finger, feeling their weight more than their ink. Therapy started again at 9. The nurse greeted me by name, not by file. "You've been busy," she said, smiling. I nodded. "Just living in daylight." My hands gripped the parallel bars as the therapist called out, "Ready?" I said, "Always." I lifted myself, not far, not long, but enough to know the world had shifted. Every inch mattered. Each breath carried proof that survival had its own posture. After the verdict, I'd expected peace to fall like a curtain. It didn't. It arrived in pieces. One unpaid bill cleared, one neighbor's visit, one steady night of sleep. Sarah checked in every Friday, reminding me that justice is a process, not a finish line. "You're still healing," she said. "That's what justice looks like when it's quiet." She was right. Healing wasn't loud. It didn't demand witnesses. It only needed truth. At noon, I rolled into the community hall for the first time since everything ended. They'd invited me to speak, but I didn't have a speech. When I entered, the room clapped. I wasn't ready for that sound. A friend from the neighborhood pressed a letter into my hand. "You made us believe the system listens." I smiled. "Only when we make it." She laughed. "Then keep making it." On the way home, the sunlight hit the sidewalk in patches, like little reminders that light could break through anything, even concrete. I thought of Greg for the first time in weeks, not with anger, not even with sorrow, just distance. The man who once spoke for me now had no voice in my life. The truth had spoken louder than he ever could. The doctor's smile, the boardroom whispers, the forged signatures, all gone. What stayed was mine: strength, patience, and a name that no longer trembled when spoken aloud. When I reached home, I placed the newest letter beside the verdict copy. The paper edges curled together slightly, as if one story leaned on the other. I looked at the wheelchair by the window, its frame catching sunlight like a mirror. It wasn't a reminder of limits anymore. It was a symbol of beginning. The lie that broke me had turned into the ground I rebuilt on. I didn't need legs to move forward. I needed truth to stand. I wheeled closer to the window, letting the morning heat touch my face. For once, I didn't close the curtains. The light stayed. I smiled, and in the reflection of the glass, it felt like the truth smiled back. The power had shifted. He smiled while my husband nodded. Now I smiled while the truth nodded back. I'm finally walking, on my own terms. Did you enjoy the story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story with respect and gratitude.